The New York Mets have now won 7 games in a row. How long can they keep this winning streak alive? We'll discuss that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use the code all in lowercase, LockedOnMLB, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Well, this Mets team is rolling right now. They complete their sweep of the Boston Red Sox on Wednesday night, their second consecutive sweep. You look at the road ahead here. You got the Reds coming into town, a team that is below 500, although we'll talk about them in the next segment. They've played some pretty decent baseball this week, so we'll go over that a little bit here. But it's an opportunity to extend this winning streak. You then go to Toronto, another bad team. This is a time to really push the envelope. The Mets know that every single day is a must-win game, and that intensity that they're playing with, it has been a lot of fun to watch. And you see that bottom of the first inning tonight, going up against Tanner Houck. Once again, the Mets jump all over a really good starting pitcher. I don't know how many times it's happened, but it's definitely been a handful where the Mets go through that top part of their lineup and 4 or 5 hitters in, they put up a 4 spot where Francisco Lindor gets things going as he is one to do. Got a leadoff hit tonight. Brandon Nimmo draws a walk. Mark Vientos loads the bases with a single. Pete Alonso had a rough night. He struck out with the bases loaded there, but Jesse Winker picks him up, hits a grand slam, and that was really all of the offense for the Mets all the way up until the bottom of the 8th inning. This was a game that was bookended by 4-run rallies. And in between, the Mets did nothing offensively. Tanner Houck settled in after giving up the grand slam. I believe he retired 12 or 13 in a row before he gave up a double to Francisco Lindor with 2 outs in the bottom of the 5th inning. Lindor was left, well, wasn't left on second. Brandon Nimmo got a base hit to advance into third, but Mark Vientos grounded out to end that threat, which also ended the day for Houck, who in some ways, I don't know if he'd won the pitching matchup, gave up more runs, but he certainly looked a lot better than Tyler McGill, which is the story of the game, how the bullpen picks up Tyler McGill. And I hate to say this is what we expected, but when I saw McGill have a good start against the White Sox, you can go back and listen to the tape. I was not convinced. That was a bad White Sox team. And tonight it was clear how much the Mets do not trust Tyler McGill. He did, to his credit, get the Mets through the first 2 innings without giving up a run, and he put up a 0 in the 4th. But in the 3rd inning, he got hit, and he got hit hard, gave up 2 base hits, then a ground rule double that scored 1, then 2 sac flies, couldn't get a strikeout in those spots to try to get out of that jam. He ends up giving up those 3 runs. Luckily, the Mets had the 4-0 lead to start the inning, so they were then clinging to a 1-run lead. McGill again was able to put up a 0 in the 4th, thanks in part to Francisco Alvarez picking off Connor Wong, who got a 2-out single. So that helped McGill get through that inning. 5th inning, he gives up a leadoff single. Carlos Mendoza had seen enough. He had seen enough. It was time to go to the bullpen. He had Thursday off, so time for all these guys to rest. And a fairly rested bullpen anyway, considering the pitching performances the Mets got in this series, from Severino and David Peterson. It really allowed the Mets here to lean into their bullpen. And the bullpen got the job done, but also the defense got the job done. This is where the Mets can be a special team. When you have the ability to play either Jeff McNeil or Jose Iglesias at second base. And there was a point this season where Jeff McNeil was not holding his own at second. He has been great defensively there lately. Not as good as Iglesias. Iglesias is a little flashier, but both of these guys are rock solid. And Lindor is the best shortstop in baseball. So when you have that much trust in your defense up the middle, especially when Bader's in center, it helps all your pitchers. But really, it can make a team just just go. It can really get you rolling because that good defense is contagious, and the Mets are just playing really good team baseball. From Brandon Nimmo, fielding a ball out of the corner, cutting it off, and holding a runner. There was a great moment in the 8th inning when Phil Maton came in, gave up what could have been a double, but Harrison Bader cut it off, kept that runner at first. That runner probably comes in on a base hit that the following batter had. So just all of these different plays that you see from the defense that don't get talked about enough. It's a huge reason why the Mets have played good baseball since June, because they got Iglesias in the fold, and just in general, guys started to play better. Brandon Nimmo started playing better defense in left. Jeff McNeil started to play better defense at second base, and it's been contagious. So that's been a huge thing for this team, and we really saw it tonight because you had a 3-inning stretch where the Mets got out of 3 consecutive jams with inning-ending double plays. Now, you credit the pitchers for rolling those double plays, getting the ball on the ground, but these were some tough turns. And it started after Tyler McGill gets pulled. Alex Young comes on, gets a fly out, but then gives up a base hit. So there's 2 runners on. Rafael Devers is up. Really dangerous situation, but he hits into a 4-6-3 double play. Great turn by Jeff McNeil there. Then 6th inning, Alex Young stays on. He walks the leadoff man. Huascar Brazaban comes in relief. He walks the first batter that he faced. That was a really dicey situation. 2 runners on, a guy in Brazaban who we've seen control elude him at times, but he was able to get a fly out. And then he gets another inning-ending double play. This one, an easy turn by Lindor. He was playing up the middle. Tristan Casas hit one right to him. It was an easy 6-6-3 double play and got Brazaban through that jam. Brazaban stayed on in the 7th inning, gives up a leadoff single, then picked up a strikeout before Danny Young came on. We'll talk about Young a little bit in the final segment because I want to go over the state of the Mets bullpen again. There is still a weapon they could go to in AAA. So we'll talk about that and just how they try to get through the rest of the season with this still glaring weakness that is that pen. But there are some signs of this unit finding some stability, and Danny Young has been one of the big reasons for it. He comes on, gets a double play ball to get out of that inning. That one was, again, 4-6-3, so McNeil to Lindor to Alonso. Young stays on for the 8th inning to face Jarren Duran and Rafael Devers, gets both of them out. So great work by Danny Young. Carlos Mendoza then goes to Phil Maton. As I mentioned, Harrison Bader cuts off a would-be double. Maton gives up another base hit, but gets the 3rd batter he faced out to escape that jam unscathed. And then the Red Sox imploded in the bottom of the 8th inning, starting with Kenley Jansen, who walked Brandon Nimmo to lead things off. Then he gave up a base hit to Mark Vientos. He struck out Pete Alonso, and Alonso snapped the bat over his knee in frustration, which is just always, I don't want to, is it cool? I think it's cool to watch. Not that he's upset and he's snapping the bat. It's always after a strikeout like that. But just the sheer strength of Pete Alonso to be able to break a bat over his knee. I challenge you, any of you, to attempt to do that. You'll probably hurt yourself. You take a wood bat and try to snap it, and your knee's going to be the thing that's more likely to snap. But that's how strong Pete is. Regardless, after that, it was just nothing but walks. Kenley Jansen walks Jesse Winker, then walked Tyrone Taylor to walk in a run. Rich Hill came on. He walked in 2 more runs. Harrison Bader got a sacrifice fly. The inning ended when Francisco Lindor hit an absolute seed into right field. The exit velocity was 111 miles per hour, but it was right at the right fielder. That ended that inning. But Edwin Diaz came on with the big lead and had no problems getting through the 9th inning. Walked 1, but then struck out 2 in a scoreless 9th inning. So the Mets bullpen put together 5 scoreless innings. Really an incredible feat. And this team has now won 7 games in a row. Can they extend that winning streak over the weekend? I want to talk about this road ahead and how keeping this winning streak alive could be the ticket for the Mets to get into October. We'll go through that in just a minute. First, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, It's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. And with the NFL season starting this week, there's going to be a lot you can play with on Prize Picks. Maybe it's Tyreek Hill getting more than 90.5 yards in week 1. Maybe it's Aaron Jones getting more than 66.5 yards. You can cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB, and you're going to get $50 instantly when you play $5. Again, that is code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks from the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and you can get the lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you notice in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, this weekend, the Cincinnati Reds coming to town to close out the Mets' second to last homestand of the season for a 3-game set. The Reds have actually just reeled off 4 wins in a row. They took the final game of a 4-game set against the Brewers where they were nearly swept, and they've now won the first 2 games. Wow, look at me doing bad math. I just caught it in my own notes. They've won 3 games in a row. My apologies. Wow. They've taken the first 2 games in their series against the Houston Astros with a day game on Thursday, unless that was back-to-back 4-game sets. Now I'm confused. Let's see where I was wrong in my notes. Did I count out the winning streak wrong? Yes, I did. Yes, I did. So regardless, they're playing a little bit better baseball of just most recent, but in August they were 12-17, so they did not have a good month there. They're 6 games under 500 on the season. This is a team the Mets should be able to beat. They don't have anything to play for other than being spoilers. They are not in this race. Yes, they have Elly De La Cruz. They have some talented starting pitching, and we'll preview that series on tomorrow's show. But the Mets have to have that same sense of urgency we've seen lately, and they're going to have, for a weekend, some packed ballparks, a lot of Mets fans. This is the time to go to these games, and this is the time for the Mets to really capitalize if they can extend this winning streak. And I hate to say they have to, because they don't. Win each series. If the New York Mets win every single series from here on out, I think they'll probably make the playoffs. Now, is that a lot to ask? Of course it is, but that's where you're at. You're still behind in this race, and the Atlanta Braves have a pretty light schedule. So you got to handle your own business and keep pace with them as much as you can. We'll see where this wild card race ends up, because at one point I said, all right, get to 90 wins. Now, looking at the Braves schedule, seeing where the Diamondbacks and Padres continue to be, as they have all won today, all 4 teams won, and that happens way too often. It might be a situation where you need to get to 92 wins to make the playoffs this year, which would just be absurd for that many good teams to exist in the National League. And you would think at some point these teams are going to fall off in some way or another, and the Mets will have opportunities to gain ground. But here's the thing about this current winning streak. If you go back even further, right? You go back to that series against the Orioles. Tough team, Mets win that series. Hit the road, easily could have won that 4-game set against the Padres, and they could have swept the Diamondbacks. This team has been playing really good baseball lately. They're getting quality starting pitching. The bullpen has started to find its footing, and the offense is so ignitable. Francisco Lindor seems to pick up 2 hits every other game. Brandon Nimmo starting to creep up there with his stats. He's starting to come around. Still has another gear he can clearly get to. Pete Alonso found his power stroke a little bit. Mark Vientos can always go off. We'll see what JD Martinez comes back looking like. Every once in a while, you see these guys, they have a kid, they come off paternity leave, best version of themselves. So maybe JD Martinez locks it in down the stretch. Jesse Winker's been doing it. Starling Marte could still be another ignitable piece. Jeff McNeil, Jose Iglesias, They've been consistent. The defense, the offense. I think the Mets are in a great position right now to really finish this season strong. And it starts with extending this winning streak as best as you can. If the Mets can make this 4 sweeps in a row, which is asking a ton, but I just want to talk about what that would mean when it comes to the math of this thing. If they did that, they would be 82-64 with 16 games left to play. If you had to get to 90 wins, that means from that point on, you can just play 500 baseball. Now, let's say you're a little bit better than that and you had to get to 92 wins, 93 wins. Well, you're right there. You are right there. If the Mets have to get to 92 wins, and they're currently at 76 with, 76 with 22 left to play. So if they have to get to 92 wins, that would mean they have to go 16-6 down the stretch. So losing a game to the Reds, as much as it might feel insignificant this weekend, that holds some consequence because at the end of the year, remember, this Mets schedule gets tougher. 7 games against the Phillies in the final couple weeks. 3 games against the Braves, 3 games against the Brewers. The only lighter series is 1 more against the Nationals. So this next 6-game stretch, huge for the New York Mets. Huge. Take advantage while you can. The Blue Jays are 7 games under 500, although they've been playing about 500 baseball at home. Still a team you got to beat. You got to have the sense of urgency. You got to get the job done. You look at how things are lined up on the pitching front. As we've talked about on recent shows, I believe they'll stick with Quintana to start on Friday night, Minaya, Severino, then Peterson to keep that trio in line to face the Phillies next weekend, and then also to face the Braves in the final week of the season. So if that's the case, in this 6-game stretch, you're going to get 2 starts from Quintana, 1 start from Blackburn. Those are games that you got to find a way to win. So this is a really critical juncture for this Mets team because the Braves are playing the Rockies for 1 more. They got 3 against Toronto. They got a makeup against the Reds and 2 against the Nationals. There's every chance the Braves might win every single one of those games. And if they don't, boom, you're right there in the playoff spot if you keep winning and holding up your end of the bargain. Now, they will play the Dodgers for 4, but that's pretty much lining up when the Mets are playing the Phillies. It's a fun race. It really is. And then you have the Padres and the Diamondbacks, right? Padres have 1 more against Detroit. I was watching that. It was distracting me as I was trying to start the show today. They ended up walking it off on a Fernando Tatis base hit in extras. So that was unfortunate. The Diamondbacks won as well. And, of course, like I said, the Braves won. The Padres, after playing 1 more against Detroit on Thursday, they got 3 against the Giants, 2 against the Mariners. So their road ahead here, not the toughest. The Tigers played them tough today, but we'll see how they do. And then the Giants, they're going to face them, but they're going to miss Blake Snell. So the Padres could roll through this stretch as well. There is a point at the end of this season where they got some tough series. They have 1 against Houston, 1 against the Dodgers, and they close against the Diamondbacks. But again, it's just on the Mets to do everything they can to continue this winning streak as long as they can, to get the math in their favor, to get closer and closer to those other teams, because the Braves are just going to be tough to catch only because their schedule is super light and they're handling business against these bad teams. The Mets got to do the same. Now you look at where the Diamondbacks are, where the Padres are. Padres with 21 games left. They're already at 80 wins. That's where I say the math has changed because I expect them to do better than 10-11 across the final 21 games. If they did that, they're at 90. So if they go 14-7, they're at 94 wins. The Mets probably aren't catching them. Diamondbacks, 22 games left to play. They're at 79 wins. If they go 500, they're going to be at 90. They got a tougher schedule. I can see the Diamondbacks falling out of this thing, but they're playing great baseball. So you say that. At the same time, you really don't know. The D-backs do have 7 games against the Brewers, so that's something to look forward to if you're a Mets fan. They have 1 more game coming up here against the Giants, but it's against Blake Snell. So that's good news for the Mets. Then they play Houston over the weekend. So there could be some ground gained over the weekend with the Mets going on or trying to get some games on the Diamondbacks if they can handle the Reds. Bottom line, the New York Mets are playing great baseball. I'm starting to believe that they can actually make a run once they get into the playoffs. I'm not saying they're going to win the World Series, but do I think this is a frisky team that could beat anybody in the wild card round and even push anyone in the NLDS? I think so. At some point, once they face a Dodgers, a Phillies in a longer series, maybe the lack of pitching overall comes back to haunt the Mets. But this is a team that has all of the vibes going in the right direction. They have quite literally, along with the Astros and the Diamondbacks, been one of the best teams in baseball for 3+ months now. And what's frustrating to me is you hear people talking about the Diamondbacks and saying, oh, that's a team that can win the World Series. The Padres, that's a team that can win the World Series. But the Mets, it's like, oh, yeah, they're not going to make the playoffs. I'm pretty sure one of our insiders texted me this. ESPN had a poll where they were predicting who's going to be in the playoffs, and then a single analyst picked the Mets. Not one. Did they not see the Mets going to San Diego and be on the precipice of winning a 4-game set, going into Arizona, and if not for a blown game by Edwin Diaz, they would have swept that series? The Mets can beat anyone, but they still have a tough road ahead. So look at this next week here. The 3 games over the weekend against the Reds and the 3 against the Blue Jays. If a week from today, the Mets went through that stretch and won 5, 6 games, you feel pretty good. If they win 4 games and win both series, that's still good. But they might drop some games still in this race. And every game you drop puts that tragic number closer and closer. So let's see if the Mets can keep things going. A big part of that is going to be their bullpen. And I believe they're starting to find a combination that is working for them. I want to talk about that pen in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Ibotta. It's summertime, which means it's barbecue season. Stock up on all of your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. Ibotta is a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies and more. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, just add your offers in the app and upload your receipt, and you get real cash that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Join the over 50 million savers and earn cash back every time you shop from over 2,700 brands and retailers, including Lowe's, Macy's, and Sephora, as well as Best Buy and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use that code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store and use the code LOCKEDONMLB. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, the New York Mets bullpen might be finding some answers, and one of them is Danny Young. Over his last 15 appearances, Danny Young has pitched to a 1.65 ERA with 22 strikeouts and 16 1/3 innings pitched. His whip is 0.92. On this season, he's got a 2.78 ERA. Danny Young has been, outside of Daniel Nunez, maybe Jose Budo, and lately Phil Maton, like one of the best relievers the Mets have had all year. And he has clearly been their best left-handed reliever, which makes me proud because I had to wear it at one point this year where I was very loud about my support of Danny Young and wanting the Mets to keep him on the roster. This was in the middle of June. I believe it was when Edwin Diaz was coming back. And I said at the time, I wanted to see Daniel Nunez and Danny Young stay on the team over Adam Ottavino, Jake Diekman, which were obvious ones at the time, but guys that it was going to be a little more difficult to see the Mets cut bait from because of their contracts and because of wanting that roster flexibility, wanting to have the guys that could be options sent down and keep the depth as best as you could. So it was those two guys. And then I even said that I prefer Danny Young and Daniel Nunez to Sean Reed Foley, Andrew Smith at the time. And that was what I really warred on, where people thought I was just being ridiculous on Danny Young. Now, granted, some of those guys, Sean Reed Foley and Drew Smith, injuries have kept them out of the equation. But Danny Young has been awesome and really good against some tough lefties too, has gotten some big outs against some big hitters. Tonight it was Jarren Duran and Rafael Devers. It's been really impressive to see, and I think the Mets now have a lefty that they can go to war with and feel pretty good about. So that was one big question that I think the Mets have answered. Who's going to be their left-handed reliever? It's Danny Young, and Alex Young is the second one, who tonight looked okay, but has had some good numbers with the Mets up to this point. I don't think that Alex Young would be in a postseason bullpen, though. Still, he's a good piece to have for now. Edwin Diaz looks great again, and I think that's going to be really important to keep him sharp. That's why you pitch him tonight. Okay, earlier in the season, if it's an 8-3 game, you're just saving bullets. You're not going to risk throwing Edwin Diaz out there. But he was rested enough to go. You have an off day, and this guy likes to pitch. So listening to your guy, taking that leash off of him, I think that's going to give you the best version of Edwin Diaz down the stretch. His best season in 2022, the Mets won 101 games. What does that mean? There was a lot of times where the Mets had to use Edwin Diaz, and that kept him as locked in as he was. So if the Mets can get a locked-in Edwin Diaz for the final month of the season and into the playoffs, that's a massive piece. Edwin Diaz at his best is still the best closer in baseball. So, well, actually, he's one of the best closers in baseball. I'm thinking Emmanuel Clase. There's other names out there that deserve that recognition as well. So I don't know if I can quite say that, but a guy that you should trust in all of these big games, yeah, Edwin is supposed to be that guy. It's been a rough season, but we're starting to see some of those flashes again that makes you confident. And again, he had a 2-game blip, but prior to that, it was 17 games of being really good. And now it's been 4 or 5 since the 2-game blip, where he's been really solid again. I like what I'm seeing out of Edwin Diaz. And Phil Maton's been great. So with Maton, you got an 8th inning guy. That's how you choose to use him, 7th inning guy, whatever it is. Diaz, you have your closer. Danny Young, you have your lefty. Reed Garrett, quietly on a nice run. His last 5 innings, only 1 walk. That's big. Just 2 hits. No runs allowed. If Reed Garrett can find that early season form, and it has looked better, that's a huge piece of this bullpen. Jose Budo is actually one of the guys that's been going through it a little bit lately, but I still got my faith in Budo being a nice piece for this pen down the stretch. Adam Ottavino and Ryan Stanek haven't been used much, but when they have been used lately, it's been pretty solid. And then Brazaban has had a couple of good appearances in a row, although I still don't trust him as far as I can throw him. And that dude is huge. There's no way I could throw him anywhere. Was he like 6'4" or something crazy? It's a big man who throws really hard, but I got no faith in him just because he hurt us too much in August. We broke that down a couple weeks ago, how Brazaban was a central figure in 3 of the 4 brutal losses the Mets had in August where they blew games. So not a ton of faith there, but for September, can he pitch and be a key piece of this pen? I do think that he's showing that ability. The guy I want to talk about again, though, is Shintaro Fujinami. Now, I mentioned this, I don't know if it was a week ago, a little bit more than that. And I read some of the YouTube comments, and people are out on Fuji. No one wants to see this guy. And I get it. He was horrible early this season. Could not throw strikes. But you have to take notice of what he is doing in Syracuse right now. Last 6 appearances, he has not given up a run. He has pitched 9 innings. He struck out 13. He has allowed just 1 hit in 9 innings. He's only walked 2. 4 of his 6 appearances, he hasn't walked any. And it's been 1 walk in the other 2 appearances. And 5 of his 6 appearances, he has not given up a hit. He's been dialed. And this goes back to August 17th. Dialed. A guy who throws really hard with a nasty split. Fujinami could be a real weapon for the Mets. And I'm curious if and when they go to it. Now, Tyler McGill, if the Mets wanted to, they could option him on Friday. They could option him down and have a 10th reliever if they chose to for the upcoming series, and then they'd have to make another roster move when Paul Blackburn was ready to make his return, which again, I believe is going to be on Tuesday next week. Would it be worth it to call up Fuji? And then when are you going to pitch him? What's the role going to be? It's tough to see him become a late inning guy in September, right? But if you're just talking about pure stuff, he has that ability and he could be a difference maker. He has thrown the ball so well. I just wonder at what point do the Mets consider making a move, because they could simply just flip Brazaban for Fujinami and see what happens. Now, you might ask, why go to Fujinami? He's not on the 40-man roster. He can't pitch in October. Well, I looked into this because I believe there might have been some loophole, and there was one. So here is the rule. A player who doesn't meet said criteria for postseason eligibility, and that said criteria is not being on either the 40-man roster or the 60-day IL on August 31st. So Fujinami, not on the 40-man roster, not on the Major League IL. He is ineligible. Here's the loophole. So if a player doesn't meet said criteria for postseason eligibility, they can still be added to a team's roster in the postseason via petition to the commissioner's office. If the player was in the organization on August 31st and is replacing someone who is on the injured list and has served the minimum amount of time required for activation. For example, they say a player on the 10-day IL who has been on the injured list for at least 10 days, or a player who's been on the 60-day IL for at least 60 days. So what that means is if they decided on Friday, you know what, we're going to try Fuji out. We're just going to put him in the bullpen and see what happens. We're going to option Tyler McGill. And they're going to have 10 relievers for this series, and they'll give him a look if an opportunity comes up. Okay. He does great. He becomes an integral piece of this team down the stretch. He's pitching lights out for this team the same way he has in AAA. All right, at the end of the season, you can make your petition to the commissioner's office. And there is a handful of guys that you could make that petition for, because you have Sean Reed-Foley, who's been on the 15-day IL forever. So he has clearly been there for the required amount of time for activation, is not able to come back. You can just basically deem Sean Reed-Foley ineligible for the playoffs and put Fujinami in that spot. Brooks Raley, even easier. He has been on the IL for 60 days, not coming back. So you can make that move if you wanted to. Same thing with Drew Smith. Same thing with Christian Scott. So the Mets have the options to actually do this. Now, the commissioner's office would have to sign off on it, but the New York Mets are paying Shintaro Fujinami over $3 million. I think they can probably get that waived and allow him to be part of the postseason roster if he comes up and contributes down the stretch in September. Now, the Mets don't need him to. They might be fine as is. I do think there has been a lot of positive signs with this bullpen, and that's not even mentioning what we've talked about earlier this week about Kodai Senga potentially being a relief option for the Mets, as well as even Christian Scott. And you also still have Daniel Nunez, who could come off the IL and still be that difference maker, although I'm a little more doubtful of that, considering the fact that he just wasn't recovering from these outings and had to go right back on the IL. I just don't know if the Mets are going to push him if he's not recovering. The guy seems to be like a big part of their future now. So we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out. But the Mets still are light on those late inning relievers. A guy that you can call into a game and they can get a bunch of strikeouts and just keep all the traffic off the bases. They have Edwin Diaz that can do that. Phil Maton, more of a pitch to contact guy, get the soft contact, but he has still been very good for the Mets. You look at Danny Young, he does have some strikeout to his game. You look at Jose Budo as a reliever, he's got some strikeouts to his game, and Reed Garrett definitely has that level of stuff. But none of those guys throw over 100 miles per hour. So I'm just curious, as he continues to stack really good appearances in Syracuse, how much are the Mets paying attention to that? And are they willing to gamble bringing a guy up that is clearly volatile, but who's got an incredibly high ceiling. It is just something that has stayed on my mind every time he goes out there in Syracuse and deals, and he did that again today. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Tomorrow's show, we will preview Mets versus Reds, and it's going to be a Friday Farm Report, so I'll try to give you some interesting prospect angle to discuss. So make sure you tune into that show. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, do me that favor, hit the subscribe button. The goal is to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the season. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. And for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel covering everything, the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.